rental ledger for a building in To Kwa Wan, one line has not changed in 2.5 years, no matter how many tenants have moved through the door beneath it. The word written there is vacated. This is the story of the accounts clerk who tried to make that word true, and what it cost her to learn why it wouldn't stay that way. There is a kind of quiet specific to Hong Kong's older buildings, the ones with terrazzo floors gone soft and gray at the corners, mailboxes still carrying the names of tenants who last paid rent under a different currency of rent control. This account comes from one of those buildings, a 7-story Tong Lao in To Kwa Wan, with no lift and a stairwell that smells permanently of the incense shop on the ground floor. The woman at the center of it asked that her name be changed. We'll call her Wing. Wing was 34, working as an accounts clerk for a private clinic in Kowloon City, when her mother's second hospital admission emptied most of what she'd saved. The math after that was simple and unkind. Her existing flat share in Mong Kok cost more than she could keep paying, while also covering her mother's outstanding bills, and every listing within her budget was smaller than the last. The subdivided unit in To Kwa Wan came up on a rental app late on a Tuesday, priced roughly 30% under comparable units on the same floor. The agent, a brisk young man who conducted the viewing over video call because he was handling 6 units that week, described the previous tenants as a family who had relocated for work and needed the unit off their books quickly. Wing asked once whether there was a reason for the price. He said landlords in older buildings sometimes just wanted turnover. She signed the lease 2 days later, partly because she didn't have the luxury of asking a second time. The unit itself was unremarkable in the way most partitioned flats are unremarkable. A single room, divided by a thin partition wall into a sleeping area and a kitchenette. A window that looked into the light well shared by 6 other units. A bathroom barely wider than the door. What she noticed on her first night and dismissed was that the mattress had 2 shallow depressions side by side, as though it had held 2 adult bodies for years, plus a third, smaller indentation near the foot of the bed. She flipped it, decided it was simply old, and went to sleep. The early weeks gave her little to notice beyond the ordinary friction of moving somewhere new. She was tired in the specific way that comes from 12-hour shifts, followed by hospital visits on her one day off. And she told herself, when she noticed things, that she was too tired to notice them accurately. The rice cooker, which she was certain she'd unplugged, was warm to the touch some evenings. A smell of steamed fish and ginger would reach her at the door some nights, gone by the time she was inside. She assumed reasonably that it came from a neighboring unit through the shared ventilation shaft, which in a building like this could carry a dozen kitchens worth of dinner through the walls. It was the extra bowl that first made her pay attention on purpose, rather than by accident. She ate alone, always had, and kept 1 bowl, 1 pair of chopsticks, because washing more than that felt like wasted water. One evening in her 6th week, she found 2 bowls set out on the small folding table, one for her, one across from it, with chopsticks laid beside each, in a way she didn't remember doing. She assumed she'd done it without thinking, some tired autopilot, and put the second bowl away. It reappeared 4 days later. Around the same time, she noticed she'd started humming a tune on her walk up the stairwell, a simple 4-note phrase she didn't recognize, until Uncle Fong, the building's caretaker, stopped sweeping the landing to ask, mildly, where she'd learned it. She said she didn't know. He didn't answer, just resumed sweeping. And something in the pause told her the question hadn't been idle curiosity. Uncle Fong had worked in the building for over 20 years. First as a security guard for a management company that no longer existed, now informally as the person who fixed the lift call button and collected the maintenance fee in cash from residents who preferred not to bank it. He was in his 70s, spoke little, and for the first 2 months, treated Wing with the same distant courtesy he extended to every new tenant on the 4th floor. That changed slightly after the humming. He began finding small reasons to be near her door, resetting a fuse, checking a leak that turned out not to exist, in a way that felt less like surveillance than a kind of quiet vigilance she couldn't yet interpret. The pattern, once she started keeping track of it in a notes app on her phone, was harder to dismiss as tiredness. On Wednesday, she found herself buying a specific cut of pork belly from a stall 2 streets over that she had no memory of ever visiting before moving in, a stall the owner greeted her at by a habit rather than a name, as though she came every week, which he confirmed when she finally asked. She did, at almost exactly the same hour for the 2 months since she'd moved in. She had no memory of most of those visits. She began setting an alarm to interrupt herself at that hour, and found that on the weeks she caught herself before leaving, she felt a discomfort close to homesickness, directed at nothing she could name. She started sleeping badly, not from fear exactly, but from a sense that her sleep was being used for something else. She woke some mornings with her hair unpinned in a style she didn't wear, bobby pins in a small dish by the mirror that she hadn't bought. She woke once with the window, which she always shut against the noise of the street, open exactly the width of 2 hands, the way you'd open it to let a smell of frying oil escape a kitchen. The building's shared light well, she would later learn, ran directly past what had once been a kitchen exhaust for the unit before the partition wall divided it, meaning that whatever airflow existed now moved in a shape that predated her tenancy by at least a decade. It was late in her 3rd month, close to the middle of the 7th lunar month, that she asked Uncle Fong directly. She'd noticed the building shrine to the earth god in the stairwell had been given fresh oranges and a thicker bundle of incense than usual, and asked whether that was standard for Yulayan, thinking it was a safe, ordinary question. He told her, in the flat delivery of someone repeating something he'd said many times, that during the 7th month, the gates loosen for everyone, not just for those with somewhere to return to, and that some units in the building carried more weight than others during that stretch. When she pushed gently, he told her what he knew, which was less a story than a set of facts he'd assembled over years of proximity. The family before her, a father who drove a delivery truck, a mother who took in piecework sewing, a daughter around 9, had lived in the unit for 6 years. The father had gone missing during a work trip across the border 18 months before Wing moved in circumstances that were never resolved. No confirmed accident, no recovered body. An insurance claim stalled indefinitely because a person who is missing rather than confirmed dead cannot be settled the way a death can. Without a body, without a death certificate, the family could not hold proper rites for him. No funeral, no placement of a tablet, none of the closing acts that in Cantonese custom are meant to formally release someone from the world of the living into whatever comes after. What they held instead, according to Uncle Fong, was a private, improvised observance in the flat itself. Incense burned at hours that weren't festival hours, paper offerings folded and left unburned in a drawer, because the mother couldn't bring herself to complete the ritual, while there was still a chance he was alive somewhere. 6 months after that, unable to make rent on a single income and drowning in the outstanding insurance dispute, the mother moved herself and the daughter out overnight, deregistering the unit through the agent without ever telling the building she was leaving, and without, Uncle Fong was fairly sure, ever finishing whatever she had started with those unburned offerings. He used a term Wing didn't know at the time, hung jaak, which he explained only enough to be useful. A kind of residual charge that settles into a place after a death that was sudden, unresolved, or improperly closed. Strongest in the months just after and around the anniversary of the event, and strongest of all during the 7th month when, as he put it, the usual boundaries thin for everyone. He said the unit had been rented out twice since the family left, both tenancies ending early, both times the agent reassigning the listing under a slightly different unit description to avoid the online reviews attaching to it. He said the discount Wing had gotten wasn't the landlord being generous. It was the market doing quietly what nobody wanted to say out loud, pricing in what the building already knew. Wing asked him because she needed a practical answer more than a cultural one. What could be done? He was honest that his knowledge had a ceiling. He knew a woman 2 streets away, not a monk exactly, but someone who did cleansings for households, salt at the thresholds, pomelo leaf water for the door frames and the bed, a chant said over the space 3 times at dawn. He was clear, without being asked, that this kind of cleansing addressed the yin buildup in the room, the heaviness that accumulates in enclosed, sunless, poorly ventilated units like this one, worse in a corridor-fed subdivision where the QA that should move through a full flat gets choked at the partition wall. But it couldn't close what the family itself had left open. That required the actual rites, a confirmed death, a tablet, a proper burning. Nobody living could complete that on the family's behalf. Not for a fee, not out of kindness. The best any outside remedy could do was suppress the weight of it for a season, maybe 2, before it settled back in. Wing paid for the cleansing anyway, the basic version rather than the fuller one the woman offered, because the fuller one cost more than she could spend without cutting into her mother's care fund and the calculation of which debt to service first, her mother's or her own unraveling, was one she made in under a minute, the way you make decisions when you've had practice making them. The cleansing helped for about 3 weeks. She slept without the alarm. The extra bowl stayed in the cupboard. Then, a few days before the Yulon gates were said to close again for the year, she came home to find the second bowl out once more, and the window open the width of 2 hands, and she stood in the doorway for a long time without going in. What decided her wasn't a single frightening night. It was the smaller, more precise realization that she had started referring to her own mother, once, in a phone call as the child's grandmother. A slip so specific and so unlike anything she would say that she hung up and sat on the floor of the kitchenette for 20 minutes before she could name what unsettled her about it. She hadn't misspoken. For that sentence, she had been thinking as someone else. She gave notice the next morning, eating the early termination penalty out of the deposit she'd fought hard to save, which meant that whatever she recovered from the unit would not cover what she still owed the hospital. She told the agent she was relocating for work. He didn't ask further, the way he hadn't offered further the first time either. She moved out on a weekday afternoon with 2 suitcases and the help of a co-worker's car, timing it, without quite admitting to herself why, for daylight and for a week outside the 7th month. Uncle Fong helped carry one of the bags down 4 flights and told her, at the entrance, not as comfort, but as information, that the unit would likely be relisted within the month under a new floor description, and that whoever took it would probably get a good price, and probably wouldn't ask why. What stays with anyone who hears this story secondhand isn't a haunting in the conventional sense. There was no single apparition, no threshold moment anyone could point to and say, there, that was it. What lingers is the shape of the arrangement itself. A family whose closing rites were interrupted by an unresolved insurance claim and an economy that required them to vacate before grief had finished its paperwork. A building whose ventilation and floor plan happened to route the old kitchen's air, and whatever traveled with it, directly toward whoever slept in that room next. A rental market efficient enough to discount the unit exactly as much as needed to keep it occupied without ever pricing in a warning. None of it required malice. The father wasn't reaching for Wing specifically, if he was reaching at all. The mother didn't intend to leave anything behind. She left because she had no other option, the same way Wing moved in because she had no other option. The 2 women's economic desperation folding into the same square footage a year and a half apart, close enough in shape that the room, or whatever keeps a room's memory, had trouble telling them apart. The unit was relisted as Uncle Fong predicted, 5 weeks later. Its floor description changed from a 200 square foot subdivided unit to a cozy studio conversion. The photographs taken at an angle that avoided the window and the light well. It rented within the week, to someone the listing agent described, in the same brisk tone he'd used with Wing, as being in a hurry to move. Whether that tenant noticed the depressions in the mattress, or the 4-note tune that carries up the stairwell some evenings, or the second bowl, isn't something anyone in the building has said out loud. The gates open again every 7th month regardless of who is renting, and close again regardless of who has learned what they should know before they signed. The family, in whatever sense they can be said to remain, never filed the paperwork that would let anyone say they'd properly gone. On the building's tenancy records, in the column marked status, the unit has read without interruption for 2.5 years now. Vacated.